Ever get that, like, I don't know, that tingle, Makes you think about, like, hidden worlds, like
Yeah.
places our senses, just can't grasp.
Right.
Yeah, welcome to Occult Archives,
Yeah.
where we dig into all the weird stuff,
Yeah.
the myths, the legends behind, some of history's most, I guess, infamous books.
Yeah, we're not afraid to get a little spooky.
Not at all. Forget the boring academic stuff.
Yeah.
We're here for the juicy bits, the claims that make you go, huh, and why people are still so fascinated by this stuff.
Right.
Today, we're going deep, like really deep into the astral plane,
Oh, yeah?
but through the lens of Theosophy.
Theosophy, exactly. We're using specifically the astral plane, its scenery, inhabitants, and phenomena explained through theosophical insight.
Catchy title.
Yeah, right. Imagine it as like a travel guide, but for a reality that's, kind of layered over ours.
Right alongside us. Yeah.
Filled with, all sorts of beings and working by its own rules.
So our main man for this trip is Charles Webster Leadbeater.
Leadbeater, yeah.
Now, this guy wasn't just, like, messing around with theories.
Yeah.
He wanted to create this, like, complete picture.
A complete picture.
Of what Theosophists actually believed about this, he calls it this interesting region.
Interesting is one word for it.
Yeah, right. But what's really cool is how they got this info. It wasn't just one person's, like, wild guess.
No.
Every single thing they put in this book had to be checked by, like, at least two other people.
At least two.
Who had, specific training.
Specific training, yeah.
And then it had to get the okay from, like, senior Theosophical students.
Like the big guys.
Yeah, the big guys.
The elders.
So, maybe ideas change over time, but this represents, like, their best understanding at that time.
Exactly. A snapshot of their worldview.
So for everyone listening, our goal in this deep dive is to, kind of distill this down.
Right, like an essence.
Yeah, the core of what they thought the astral plane was. What it's like, what you might see there, who's hanging out there, and all the strange events that people say happen there.
Right, and all in a way that, doesn't get too bogged down in jargon or theoretical stuff.
Exactly. We want to keep it interesting.
Keep it grounded.
So where do we even begin with this?
Really good question.
Okay, let's start with this idea of how real the astral plane is.
The reality of it.
Because Leadbeater, he comes out swinging, like right off the bat. He uses this phrase, absolute reality.
Absolute reality.
But then he says, he reads it in, like, a practical sense, like the way we experience reality every day.
Everyday reality.
To make sure we get it. He even uses this, like, this landmark everyone knows in London.
Right.
He says astral stuff, objects, beings, they're as real as Charing Cross.
As real as Charing Cross.
So he's not messing around.
No, he's making a statement. And understanding that, it's really key. In theosophical thought, the astral plane, it's not some abstract thing.
Right, not just an idea.
It's a real place, just like, a physical location. But it's made of, finer, subtler matter.
Like a different kind of material, yeah.
And while Leadbeater acknowledges that, astral things aren't eternal, they are real within their own context.
Right, within their own lifespan.
So it's not this simple heaven or hell situation.
Right, nuanced.
It's a complex, transitional place. And what happens there depends a lot on the person's earthly attachments, their thoughts, their spiritual development.
So, like, you could have a peaceful journey or, be stuck in some lower, more chaotic part of the astral plane. He also tackles this confusion about the word plane.
Right, the word itself.
And I think that's helpful for us, too.
Yeah.
He says sometimes people use it loosely,
Loosely, yeah.
And that leads to some dismissing the whole thing as just speculation. But he insists that, these are real, solid things.
Perfectly definite planes.
Each one with its own kind of matter, with its own density.
Its own specific properties.
He even compares it to, like, visiting different countries.
Traveling.
Yeah, people with the right training can access and actually observe these places.
Like explorers charting new territory.
Right. And by comparing what these trained folks saw, Theosophists believed they were building, a reliable understanding of these planes.
Like compiling a map based on firsthand accounts.
Right. Leadbeater then lays out this hierarchy of the planes.
The structure of the cosmos.
Starting with the most dense and moving up to the most refined.
Right.
Astral, Divacanic, Sushuptic, Nirvanic.
5 main planes.
5 main ones, yeah.
And he even mentions 2 even higher ones.
Whoa.
But he says, those are beyond our grasp right now. Like, humanity's not ready for that yet.
Too advanced.
Yeah, too far out.
And to explain the difference between these planes, he uses like a really helpful example.
Yeah.
States of matter. Like solid, liquid, gas.
Stuff we know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like water. Yeah, he points out that those are all just subdivisions of the physical plane. So the difference between physical and astral, it's like the difference between ice and steam.
But on a much grander scale.
Yeah, a fundamental difference.
Right. Now, zooming in on the astral plane, Leadbeater tells us it's not, like, uniform.
Right, not all the same.
It's at these 7 subdivisions, each one with its own level of materiality.
And the matter in each one behaves differently.
Right. He groups them into 3 categories. 1, 2, 3 together, then 4, 5, 6, and then 7, the lowest, stands alone.
7's the basement level.
Basically. And the differences between these groups are, they're significant, like the difference between a solid and a liquid.
Big changes.
Yeah, whereas the changes within a group are more subtle, like between different kinds of solid.
Like wood versus metal. Okay, so when we look those middle subdivisions, 4, 5, and 6, he says they have our physical world as kind of like a background.
A backdrop, yeah.
But everything is perceived through these, what he calls astral senses.
Which are obviously different from our physical senses.
Yeah, totally different. He describes the 6th subdivision as being pretty similar to, our everyday life on Earth.
Earthly existence without the physical limitation.
Right, no need to eat, sleep, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And as you move up through the 5th and 4th, it gets less and less material.
More detached from earthly concerns.
Right. So you might see familiar things, but their connection to the physical weakens.
Okay, and that brings us to astral vision.
Astral vision, yeah.
Which is like crucial for understanding how you'd experience the scenery of the astral plane.
Yeah.
Leadbeater says it's totally different from how we see things physically.
Totally different.
One of the coolest things he mentions is being able to see objects from all sides at the same time.
All angles simultaneously.
Yeah, including the inside of solid things.
Like an X-ray vision.
He gives this example of a glass cube.
Okay, a glass cube.
In the astral, you'd see all 6 sides at once, all equal, not like our physical view where the far side seems smaller.
Because of perspective.
Yeah, because of distance. So imagine seeing something like that, all sides at once.
It would warp your sense of space.
Totally change how you understand 3 dimensions. It's like having X-ray vision and 360-degree vision combined.
Exactly. And it's not just about multidimensional perspective. Astral sight also lets you see types of physical matter that are normally invisible to us.
Like what?
Like atmospheric particles, the emanations coming from living things, and these different levels of what he calls etheric matter.
Etheric matter, okay?
He suggests that this etheric stuff permeates all physical matter.
Whoa.
And could be like a huge field of scientific study if we could only see it.
It's like we're only seeing the surface level, and astral vision lets you see the energy underneath.
Exactly, the underlying structure. He then introduces this idea that every physical object has, like, an astral counterpart.
A twin in the astral.
Made up of different types of astral matter. And then there are auras, the auras of living beings.
Oh, right, auras.
Especially the human aura, which he describes as this luminous, oval-shaped mist.
The luminous mist.
Yeah, with a complex structure, the auric egg.
Okay, so auras are like, what, the energy field around a battery?
Kind of, but way more complex, and they reflect our thoughts, our emotions.
So your aura changes depending on your mood.
Exactly.
What I find really interesting is how Leadbeater connects this to Madame Blavatsky's teachings.
Oh, right, the 7 principles of man.
Yeah. He says that even when you're just starting to develop astral sensitivity, you can directly observe some of these principles.
Like the etheric double, the prana, which looks like rosy light, and the kamic aura, with these flashes of desire.
So you can actually see these things.
According to Leadbeater, yes.
Wild. He mentions that seeing the higher aspects, like the devacanic aura and the Karana Sharira, takes more advanced training.
More refined vision. And he stresses that these auras aren't just like passive things. They're the actual manifestation of the ego, the higher self, on their respective planes.
So the aura is like the real you on those planes.
In a sense, yes. He makes the point that the auric egg is the real human.
The real deal.
And the physical body is just what materializes within that on this physical plane.
Okay, so like the physical body is just one layer.
One expression of the multi-layered self.
He describes this journey of the ego, descending through these planes, taking on different bodies made of the matter of each plane. It's like a layered view of consciousness.
Exactly. It goes way beyond just the physical.
So astral vision It's not just about seeing stuff.
No.
Leadbeater also mentions this ability to magnify tiny particles, like
Okay.
at will.
Like a microscope.
Way better than a microscope. He says you can see molecules and atoms
And not just see them, understand their structures.
with a level of detail that's beyond our current science,
Right. He even mentions seeing colors beyond our normal spectrum.
like infrared and ultraviolet.
Exactly.
So imagine looking at a rock.
A simple rock.
With trained astral sight, it's not just a boring lump.
Oh, no.
He lists all these things you'd see. All the physical matter, the vibrations, the astral counterpart, the jiva, the life force, the aura, the elemental essence.
It's a symphony of energy and information.
And that's why, Leadbeater argues, people without proper psychic training, they often get the astral world wrong.
They misinterpret what they see.
They're only getting these tiny glimpses of a huge, complex reality.
It's like trying to understand a book by just looking at a few random words.
He mentions these shifting forms of the inhabitants, the illusions they can project, the difficulty of putting it all into words, and even the possibility of, like, intentional trickery.
Deception.
Yeah. He also says that the regular inhabitants of the astral plane, they're mostly aware of astral objects.
Right. Physical matter is invisible to them.
So it's like two realities, overlapping, but mostly unaware of each other.
Separate but coexisting.
Okay, now for the fun part,
Oh, yeah.
the seventh, the lowest subdivision.
The basement level.
Leadbeater doesn't hold back. He describes it as a distorted reflection of our world where everything good and beautiful is absent.
Absent, yeah.
He even quotes this ancient Egyptian text that says it's a place with no water, no air, a realm of blackest night.
Where beings wander aimlessly.
He says it's a realm of, like, self-created darkness and horror, their own personal hell.
It's a powerful image.
It is, right.
Right.
Like our inner turmoil could actually manifest in another realm.
Heavy stuff. And he mentions the sense of density there, like it's physically unpleasant.
Like trying to move through thick mud.
Yeah, something like that. Definitely not a place you want to end up.
Okay, so let's move on to something a little less gloomy.
Right, let's lighten things up.
The higher subdivisions, 1, 2, and 3.
Top floors.
These are far removed from the physical world, made of much lighter matter. Inhabitants here are often lost in their own thoughts and create their own environments.
They shape their reality.
Although these creations are real enough for other inhabitants to see.
Objective within that context.
Leadbeater says this is the summerland that people talk about in seances.
Where spirits build houses and cities.
It's like their imagination takes on a physical form.
In a way, yes.
He also talks about communication on the astral plane, saying it's often limited by how much an entity knows.
Their level of development.
Those who are more free can communicate telepathically.
Mentally.
But many are stuck with limitations like they had on Earth, which leads to them forming groups based on, like, shared beliefs.
Birds of a feather.
And finally, in terms of the scenery, Leadbeater mentions the records of the astral light.
Astral records, yeah.
It's like a universal memory bank with a photographic record of everything that's ever happened.
A cosmic history book.
It's permanently stored in this substance called Akasha.
Akasha, right.
But it's reflected in the astral light in, like, a fragmented way.
Disconnected snapshots.
So someone limited to the astral plane might only see, like, random bits of the past.
Like trying to understand a movie from a few frames.
But these images are still a big part of the astral environment for those who can see them.
A constant replay of history.
Okay, so we've explored the landscape. Now, who's living there?
Right, the neighbors.
Leadbeater divides them into human, non-human, and artificial.
3 main categories.
Let's start with the human ones, which he further splits into the living and the dead.
Though dead isn't quite accurate since they still exist, just without a physical body.
Yeah, just not in the same way.
Right.
So first up, the living human inhabitants. He outlines 4 classes.
4 classes.
First is the adept, or chela, in the Mayavarupa. Now, this sounds complicated, but imagine it as a special mental vehicle
A spiritual avatar.
that advanced individuals create to navigate these higher realms.
Like a high-tech spacesuit for the spiritual planes.
It's used on the devacanic levels by those who've reached a certain level of mastery.
Spiritual master.
At first, their master creates this form for them.
The master helps them build it.
Then they learn to create and use it themselves.
Like training wheels.
He highlights the perks of this Mayavarupa. Instant travel between astral and devacanic, access to higher powers, and basically invisibility to normal astral vision.
Unless they choose to be seen.
Right. And for students under a master, They're fully conscious in this form.
Fully aware and active.
It sounds like a big step in spiritual evolution.
A major upgrade.
Okay, second class is the psychically developed person, but not under a master's guidance.
The self-taught.
Leadbeater's clear that psychic abilities and real spiritual growth, they don't always go together.
Two different things.
These folks are usually conscious out of their body, but they're more likely to be tricked or misunderstand things because they lack training.
They're navigating without a map.
Their astral journeys can be all over the place, and their memories of it can be vivid or fuzzy.
It varies.
And they appear in their own astral body.
Not a Mayavirupa.
Okay, third category is the ordinary person. Someone who hasn't worked on psychic abilities.
The average Joe.
He describes their astral body as just floating around, mostly unconscious, during sleep.
Sleepwalking in the astral.
And that, he says, is where dreams come from.
Jumbled memories of astral experiences.
He says these astral bodies are kind of shapeless at first, but become more defined as we develop mentally and spiritually.
So dreams might be glimpses into our unconscious astral life.
Interesting.
And lastly, among the living, we have the black magician, or their student.
Okay, the dark side.
Like the opposite of the adept. They use their development for selfish or harmful purposes.
For evil.
Leadbeater includes a wide range here, from folks practicing low magic, like obeah or voodoo, to high-ranking Tibetan black magicians, sometimes called dukpas.
Dudpas, okay.
Though, he clarifies that's not always accurate. He talks about the differences between Tibetan traditions and how some less strict groups might have people with bad intentions.
So not all Tibetan magic is bad.
Right. It's more nuanced than that. He also mentions that occult students from different groups might run into each other on the astral plane.
So like astral rivals.
Now, let's move on to the dead, those without physical bodies.
Okay.
Leadbeater lists 9 main classes.
9.
9. First is the Nirmanakaya, a very exalted being who rarely shows up on the astral,
Okay.
but might create a temporary astral body if needed for compassionate work.
So they only manifest if there's a good reason.
Exactly. He doesn't say much more about them, but points to other theosophical texts for more info.
Fair enough.
Second class is the Chela, an advanced student waiting for their next reincarnation.
Waiting to be reborn.
They've bypassed the usual post-death state, devachan, to keep working on the astral plane.
So they skip a step to keep learning.
With their teacher's permission, yes. They remain conscious until they're reborn, actively working.
Dedicated students.
Leadbeater says this is becoming more common as humanity evolves.
So more advanced souls are choosing this path.
The third and largest group is the ordinary person after death.
The most common scenario.
Right. Their experiences vary a lot, and their time on the astral plane can be anywhere from days to centuries.
Wow, a big range.
Yeah, he says the ideal situation is for a pure person to quickly shed the astral body and move on to devachan.
Straight to the good place.
But for the average person with earthly desires, a longer stay in Kâmaloka is needed.
Kâmaloka. Okay.
This involves the Kamarupa, a rearranged version of the astral body.
A rearranged astral body.
It's confined to levels that match its dominant energies.
So like similar vibes attract.
And as those lower energies fade, it rises to higher subdivisions. He suggests this explains why communication with higher spheres in seances is often limited.
Also, that's why those communications can be patchy.
Leadbeater distinguishes between the astral body before death and the Kamarupa after death, talking about how astral particles sort themselves out and how the higher mind, manas, influences their dissipation. He's very clear that dying doesn't change your character or intelligence.
So you don't suddenly become a saint just because you died.
He also talks about the confusion caused by some Western religious beliefs about the afterlife, particularly the idea of eternal punishment.
Right, like hellfire and brimstone.
He says many people drift in the astral, not knowing what's happened or what to do.
Lost souls.
He then cautions against trying to develop spirits through mediumship.
Like trying to help them evolve through seances.
He says it can actually strengthen their lower desires, hindering their spiritual progress, and maybe even causing them to miss out on a future incarnation.
Wow, so it can be harmful.
He contrasts that with the help offered by trained occult students who understand the process. He also warns against excessive grief from loved ones, saying it can disrupt the deceased's transition.
So too much mourning can be bad.
He suggests focusing on loving remembrance, good wishes instead.
Positive vibes.
He explains why some entities might want to communicate and why mediums are needed for physical communication.
Because they need to borrow the medium's energy, right?
Exactly, etheric matter. He describes clumsy attempts at communication without a medium, like throwing stones or rapping.
So that's what's behind those unexplained noises.
Often, yes. He cautions that many spirits are drawn to mediums because of their earthly attachments, and that can be harmful for both sides. He warns against frequent seance attendance.
So seances are not all fun and games.
The fourth class is the shade. This is what's left of the Kâmaloka after the higher principles have gone, but with some lower mind, manas, still clinging to it.
So it's not the real person anymore.
Right. The real person's moved on to Devachan. But the shade keeps their appearance, memories, and quirks, often mimicking them in seances without realizing it.
A ghostly impersonator.
As the manas fades, its intellect goes down, and it becomes susceptible to bad influences before eventually becoming a shell.
Okay, so the shell is like the empty husk.
Exactly. No mana's left. It just drifts. But near a medium, it can be briefly animated, mimicking expressions or handwriting.
Like a puppet.
It also reacts to low-level vibrations, echoing its last state as a shade. Leadbeater also mentions the etheric shell, which stays close to the physical body and causes churchyard ghost stories. Both types are mindless and can be manipulated by black magic, which is creepy. He emphasizes that at death, we leave behind 3 corpses: physical, etheric double, and Kâmaloka.
3 corpses, that's a lot to clean up.
The 6th class is the vitalized shell. Leadbeater says this isn't truly human.
Okay.
It's a shell animated by a created elemental and always evil, a tempting demon used in practices like voodoo and obia.
So something else is puppeteering the shell.
Exact.
The 7th class is those who died by suicide or sudden death.
A difficult category.
He says their entry into the astral is different from those who die naturally.
They have coarser astral matter clinging to them.
And that pulls them to the lower levels of Kâmaloka.
For pure souls, it might be oblivion or pleasant dreams. But for those with brutal natures, it's a conscious hell, where they become evil entities trying to satisfy their desires through living people.
That's intense.
He says their power fades near purity and they hang around places of indulgence.
So like bars and casinos.
Meeting a compatible medium can prolong their state and create bad karma. They stay for at least their natural lifespan. Suicide makes it worse, hindering the higher ego's withdrawal.
So a lot of suffering involved.
He says the level of guilt varies depending on the circumstances.
It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
8th, and thankfully rare, are the vampire and werewolf.
Oh boy, here we go.
Leadbeater describes them as leftovers from earlier human evolution.
Like evolutionary throwbacks.
The vampire is an entity unable to stay in Kâmaloka, drawn to this destructive 8th sphere.
The 8th sphere sounds bad.
To avoid it, they try vampirism, transfusing blood into their physical body through their partially materialized Kâmaloka.
Whoa, so they're not fully dead.
The solution is to dig up the body and burn it.
Yeesh.
The werewolf is a cruel person who can project their astral body, which can be taken over by other entities and materialized as a wild animal, usually a wolf.
So it's like a possession.
The wounds on the animal appear on the person's body. It's less dangerous once they're physically dead.
Okay, so at least there's an end to it.
Lastly, the 9th class. Black magicians or their students.
Back to the dark side.
They use magic to stay in the astral, often harming others, like draining life force.
So they're messing with forces they don't understand.
And that wraps up the human inhabitants.
A whole lot going on there.
Now on to the non-human inhabitants. Leadbeater breaks them down into 4 main groups. He emphasizes these are vast kingdoms, some less evolved than us, some about the same, some way beyond.
A whole different set of rules.
He does mention some things he can't talk about. Advanced beings from other planets, even more exalted visitors, and 2 other evolutionary streams sharing our planet.
Secret stuff.
The first group is what he calls elemental essence.
Elemental essence, okay.
He's talking about the 3 kingdoms that came before minerals in our evolution. The first 2 are on higher planes, beyond our understanding.
Too advanced.
We're focusing on the third one, which is super diverse, with over 2,400 varieties.
2,400? That's a lot.
This essence is highly sensitive to human thought. Our will and desires can shape it into temporary elementals.
So our thoughts can create beings.
Temporarily, yes. And then they dissolve back into the essence.
Wild.
He says these elementals are grouped into 7 categories, matching the 7 states of matter, what we used to call earth, water, air and fire, which are really solid, liquid, gaseous, and etheric.
The classic elements.
He points out that alchemists actually had a better grasp of these elements than we give them credit for.
They were onto something.
Our thoughts can speed up or slow down the evolution of this essence.
So we have a responsibility here.
It's used a lot in magic and seances. It's a force that needs someone to activate it, and it can reflect images from the astral light. He warns not to confuse it with the monadic essence of minerals.
Different types of essence.
The second group is the Kâmarupas of animals.
Animal souls?
Sort of. It's a big group, but temporary. Most animals don't have individualization like humans.
So they don't reincarnate as individuals.
Their monad, their life essence, goes back to the collective after death. But their kamic aura, their desires and emotions, forms a Kamarupa that has a brief, dreamlike consciousness.
Like a fleeting dream.
Individualized domestic animals, the ones with strong bonds, have a longer, more vivid astral life.
Because of the connection with humans.
This group also includes those apes who are about to become human.
Almost human.
Third group is nature spirits.
Fairies and gnomes and such.
He emphasizes how many and varied they are. Their evolution is totally separate from ours. They're like the elementals of a higher evolution.
Or advanced elementals.
There are 7 classes matching the states of matter. Gnomes for earth, undines for water, sylphs for air, salamanders for fire or ether.
The classic elemental beings.
They have lots of names: fairies, pixies, elves, and so on. They often appear human-like, often small, but can take any form.
Shapeshifters.
They can materialize, but are usually invisible.
So they're all around us, but we can't see.